Town of Loomis Land Use Subcommittee meeting for Parks and Recreation. Pursuant to Executive Order N2920, certain provisions of the Open Meeting Act are suspended due to a state of emergency in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Consistent with the executive order, the 2020 General Plan Update Parks and Recreation Committee meeting will be held via Zoom format. And in order to participate in this meeting, the instructions are located on our agenda. And when you are using the Zoom software, basically you would need to raise your hand in order to alert the clerk that you'd like to make a public comment. And again, all of that is on our agenda. So we have our call to order. Let's do our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, may we have roll call, please?
Yes. Okay. Chairperson Jan Clark-Kretz.
Here.
Vice Chair Bonnie London.
Here.
Matt Fox.
Here.
Russ Kelly.
Here.
Eden Lee.
Here.
Joanne Bridges doesn't look like she's quite made it yet. Catherine Sears.
Here.
Auxiliary member Jesse Lunsford.
Here.
And auxiliary member Rebecca Golan.
Here.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you so much again for all of the participation. It's just really wonderful. Now is the time for committee comment for items not on the agenda. Does anybody have a comment for items not on our agenda tonight? Bonnie.
I just want to let everybody know that the first committee that started work, the Housing Element Committee, they will be bringing forward recommendations for the draft for the Planning Commission on Tuesday. So just to let everybody know about that.
Thank you. Rosie?
Hi everyone, my name is Rosie Ramos and I'm staff from the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, and I'm just here to do a really quick reminder for a survey that we have open right now. That's for the Sacramento Regional Parks and Trails plan that we're developing. I'm going to drop in the link to the survey in the chat. I believe that staff from Loomis has already shared the information across a variety of networks. So I'm just really here to give a quick reminder that this is a visioning plan that we're doing with our 6 counties in the region to create a connected network of trails. So we are looking to get as many participants from the communities as many as we can get. So we want to know where people want to walk, where they want to bike to, so that we can use this information as we create this regional vision for our future trails network. Happy to take any questions, but I'll stop there because I know we don't have a lot of time. So I'll drop it in the link. And if you have any questions, I'll also leave my email in there as well. So if you are not too familiar with the plan and the project, I'm happy to provide more details offline as well.
Thank you, Rosie. And I think it's up through April 30th that we can do the surveys.
Yes, thank you for
Okay.
that. Yes, April 30th, which is next Friday. And then if you take the survey at the end, you'll have a chance to enter into our raffle for $50 to a grocery store.
Okay, and then I would encourage all the committee members to get Rosie's contact information and to contact her directly too, if you want to. It's a really important function that SACOG is doing for our region. Thank you.
We also have that information posted on the town's Facebook site with the link to it and also the expiration date and all of that. So thank you, Rosie.
And when the expiration date is coming up real close, right? When is it
Yes.
exactly?
April 30th.
Okay, thank
So
you.
next Friday.
Next Friday. Yeah, and tell all your friends, tell everybody.
Yeah,
Oh,
many
okay.
people. Yeah.
All right, very good.
Thank you.
Catherine Sears. Catherine, did you have a comment?
I was wondering if we were going to do anything, because there's going to be a drought this year, about the fire safety along the creeks and the streets. So I think I just want to put a bug in everybody's ear because we need to do something. I've seen that Nevada City has done stuff and that Placer County said they were going to clear up things, but it's only if a tree is going to fall into the street. And we need more help than that.
Okay. Let's see. Does anybody else have any comments?
I think one announcement is that the town has put up their social pinpoint site. Mary Beth, if you could post that. This is a location where you can actually go in and put a pin on a map and talk about various issues about the general plan. So that's going to be up for some time. So please go in there and do that. And then second of all, for those, we did bring up Parks and Recreation, I think at the 3 o'clock meeting we had today, especially about trails. So it's about a 2-hour meeting, but it was worth it. And I think we will be inviting Paul back for the circulation committee. So what I think we can do is invite all the committee members to participate in that because it was a good discussion.
And to your point, Anders, and back to Catherine's public comment or your comment, Catherine, if you were to attend the Public Safety and Noise Committee and bring your comments or send your comments to them too, because we were definitely talking about that at that meeting as well, which is really important. And when does the next one meet, Mary Beth? It would be a month from yesterday, I guess. Okay. So
Yeah, that's on the 19th of May at 6 o'clock.
Okay. Is there anybody else?
And the other place you could post that comment too. I mean, we'll take it. I'll go forward on my end, but a good place to put it is I just added the link for the social pinpoint mapping tool, and you can put it in that format too. There's an ideas wall. There's the different elements of the general plan committee. So circulation, conservation of resources. If you can post a pin on one of those maps, it'll give you an opportunity to play with that mapping tool and see how it functions.
Yeah, there's a map for public health and safety, so definitely that's a good place to pin that.
Okay.
Okay.
Is there any other comments from the committee or from the public? None? Okay. All right, we're going to move on to adoption of the agenda. And is there a committee member that would like to make a motion to adopt our agenda for this evening?
Make a motion to adopt the agenda.
I'll second.
Thank you. And may we have a roll call, please?
Yes. Jan Clark Kretz,
Aye.
Bonnie London,
Yes.
Matt Fox,
Yes.
Russ Kelly,
Yes.
Eden Lee,
Yes.
Catherine Sears,
Catherine, you're muted.
Yes.
Thank
okay.
you.
And it looks like Joanne Bridges still is not here, so we got everybody.
Okay, great.
Yeah, that was Joanne who called during the pledge, and I'm sorry about that, but her internet service was down, so she wasn't able to connect, and I promised her I'd send her the video link immediately after the meeting. So.
Okay. So the next item is our consent agenda, which contains our minutes from the last meeting. Is there any comment from the committee or the public on our consent agenda? Okay, and there's none, Mary Beth, no public members? Okay, is there anybody in our committee that would like to make a motion to accept our consent agenda?
I so move to accept the consent agenda.
Second.
I second.
Okay. May we have a roll call, please?
Yes, Jan Clark-Kretz,
Aye.
Bonnie London,
Yes.
Matt Fox,
Yes.
Russ Kelly,
Yes.
Eden Lee,
Yes.
Catherine Sears.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, great. Now we're going to move to committee matters, and I will turn it over to Mary Beth.
Yes, thank you and welcome everybody. I'm going to turn this portion over to our presenter for the evening, your technical staff, Mark Teague with PlaceWorks.
Thank you. And I will attempt to share my screen. Hopefully that was successful and you can all see a PowerPoint. Just nod if you can hear me.
We can see it.
Yep.
There we go. There we go. All righty. This is the most fun committee. Don't tell any of the others that I'm working on. You guys are all about play, and we don't do enough of that as adults. And I refuse to be an adult, so let's keep going. We're going to talk a little bit today about existing conditions. And one of the difficult things that we're having to come to terms with is we don't have some detailed data about the facilities we have. And some of the data that we do have is kind of interesting. And we're taking credit for parks that aren't within our corporate boundaries. We're taking credit for parks on land that we don't own, like the school district. And to a certain extent, that's done by a lot of people. The difficulty, of course, is that we have these standards that exist in the current general plan that may be a little difficult to reach, not only currently, but also in the future. So we need to talk a little bit about that. And I hope that all of you were able to at least skim through the 2010 Parks and Rec plan that was put together. Lots of useful information in there, lots of really interesting things, lots of really expensive things too. But by and large, it's a really nice compendium of sort of the state-of-the-art parks and recreation in 2010. Things haven't evolved all that much since then, so it's a really good baseline document for us to refer to and take a look at. And it does have some of the most up-to-date inventory that we've been working on. So a couple of you have sent pictures, some of which are going to be in this presentation, not to spoil it. But please do keep the pictures coming. Jesse, not a single picture of you out wandering around. I am disappointed, but maybe by the next time you can take a picture. So we talked a little bit about existing conditions. Here we have Sunrise Park and we have the Blue Anchor Park, and there's some interesting email activity on that. The 3 acre number, Bonnie, I came up with that because I used Google Earth and I went bing, 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 here's roughly what it is. And I used 3 acres because couldn't find anything that agreed on how big the park was. And it's interesting because when people say park, they have these images that pops into their mind. Well, parks also include things that we wouldn't normally associate with a park. They include things like parking lots, restrooms, sidewalks, things like that aren't necessarily for play, but they're essential to the operation of the facility. But I will grant everybody the ability to say, look, Mark, I'm not counting a parking lot as part of the park. Fair enough. But it is, in fact, something that we would normally include in the calculation for a park and certainly in the construction of a park because some of this stuff is essential. When I first started planning, neighborhood parks didn't have restrooms or parking lots. The idea was you walked or ran or rode your bike to the park, and when you had to go to the restroom, you went home. Or in my case, you went to somebody else's home. Things have changed a little bit because it's as agencies have consolidated parks, it has become more difficult for people to get to a neighborhood park, and so restrooms go there. Those, of course, have all sorts of attendant societal issues associated with them, none of which I can provide easy solutions for as part of our discussion. We also have included in our park ratio schools and other things that are in there. And we don't have a really good, clear policy statement of how we should count those. Do we count the entire school site? Well, that seems a little too much, to me anyhow, because you don't have access to the full school site. Do we count just part of the school site that we have leased? Okay, maybe that's the most legitimate way of doing it, but in some cases, we only have access to the tennis courts for a small period of the time, for a small period of the day. And how do you factor that in? I don't wish to create a formula that requires an Excel spreadsheet and a PhD in mathematics to figure out, but it's something that this committee should really think about. If we're going to have parks in our parks plan that are not owned by the town and are outside of our corporate boundaries, we need to be able to explain how we count those. Is it 1-to-1, which is fine if that's what we're going to do, or is there some factor that we want to put into that? There is no tried and true rule of thumb for this. It's entirely what the town wants to do. And, honestly, from my perspective, I just need to be able to write it down so that moving forward, when new development comes in, they understand how that works. These are goals and policies in the current general plan. And one of the things that we'll be doing as a committee is editing these, adding to them, subtracting from them. There's really no requirement to do anything. If you like them all, that's fine. If you don't like any of them, that's fine too. But at the end of our task, what we're hoping to do is recommend to the main committee and then ultimately the commission and so forth, a set of policies that govern how we do parks and open space in the town. And as you can see here, there's already ensconced in the guideline or in the goals and policies, coordination and cooperation with those other agencies. If we going to continue to go down that path, and I believe that we are, we need to reach out to those agencies and make sure they're still okay with that. Lots of things happen on school sites, and where they used to be open, when I was a kid, you could cycle and wander around a school site at any time of the day or night. Nobody really cared because you didn't really get up to much mischief. Nowadays, a lot of the schools are starting to resemble fortresses, and for unfortunate reasons. And that really limits what you can do on or around the school site. And so we should talk to those agencies that own that land and see if they're still open for that, or maybe they have other ideas in mind. So this came out of the 2010 Parks Master Plan. And there's some interesting things about this. For example, the Montserrat Conservation Area is not open to the public. Open to the public. So while it may be open space and you can certainly drive by and look at it, it's very pretty, you're not allowed on the trails or anything that's out there unless you live there. That's per the restrictions that are out there. You will find that that's a pretty common thing for anything that is preserved as conservation. To a biologist and to a resource agency, when you're conserving something, they don't want people there. It's conserved for nature. When you add a trail, you might as well be paving it. I exaggerate, but that's kind of the impression I get when I'm in these meetings with them. My goodness, you're adding a trail, people will be there. Yeah, that's a good thing, right? And I was at one meeting, and it was really a fun meeting, and they said, well, we just put up a little split rail fence along the trail, and 90% of the people will stay on this side of the fence because we're conditioned to do that. 10% of the people will get into the wet areas and the mud, and later in life, we call those people biologists. So that's kind of how they go through it, but they do require impact assessments for trails, just like you would for a road or you would for any other kind of development. So something to keep in mind that conservation doesn't mean park. And definitions are something we should probably talk about as a committee as we start to write the policies so that we have a consistent vocabulary moving forward. One of the things that Jan brought up was private recreation was listed in here, which I thought was interesting, and I would not have done so. Certainly it's an asset to the community, but it's not, I mean, I can't go play Frisbee out there or let my dog run around. So, I mean, those are also things we need to talk about. Trails, and we just had a visit from SACOG, and I love trails. And I know that several of you do as well. So connectivity and access are essential. I love this story because my father lives along a trail in Merced, and Merced has a policy in their general plan that if it's a natural waterway or drainage, it cannot be undergrounded or paved. It must be incorporated into design. And they have lineal parks that go along these trails. These parks have no street access, right? So the houses back up to the trail corridor, and they have little parkettes along the way, little areas, maybe, I don't know, 15, 20,000 square feet, if that much. We would call them in the parlance a tot lot. It's a place where people, young mothers and fathers, would go with their strollers and let the little ones run around. Okay. My sister used to catch pollywogs in the creek behind the house. And my father was so worried when we moved in that someone was going to steal his television, jump his fence, run down the alley, and be out of there. In the 20 years that he lived there, he had 3 things stolen from his driveway, nothing ever stolen from the trail. So, we talk about security being eyes on the trail. There are lots of design things we can do. We talk with the police on how to do these things properly. But when we start to plan for trails, particularly those trails that provide neat little shortcuts for children and for adults to get places, we'll start to get that kind of resistance from landowners. We need to be able to talk through that with them and talk through what that means. But for heaven's sakes, trails are awesome and we need more of them. Huh, Jesse? So, and they need to go someplace, right? It's always fine to have a trail. And I've walked on many a trail where you get to the end of the trail, you turn around and come back, and that's the extent of it. But it's really nice if they go somewhere. These are the policies out of the 2010 master plan, and it calls for something that I think is pretty interesting. 5 acres of neighborhood and parkland per 1,000 and 5 acres of open space per 1,000. Wow. I have not worked in an agency anywhere else where that is a standard. That is an incredibly high threshold to meet. It's even more interesting to me that many of the parcels in this town are larger than parks I played on as a child. And I kind of wonder whether parks need to be in the periphery of town or whether we need to have trails in the periphery of town that lead into town, and we need to have parks closer to the center where many of the people are. Just something to think about. The Quimby Act is awesome, but it's a subdivision related document. Don't worry about the technicalities there, but if we're not subdividing, the Quimby Act doesn't come into play. We need to make sure that our impact fees are based on what we need, and some of that will come right out of the general plan. It's just a cleanup thing that we'll take care of, but you'll see that word Quimby Act. That pertains to subdividing land, not for apartments or redevelopment and things like that. One of the policies I do like is let's link everything together. In an ideal world, you should be able to get to any park, any school, and ideally any place in town without having, to leave a trail or a sidewalk. That's called access. It's just like when you tell your kids you can leave home, but you can't cross the street. You should have a trail system that allows them to play. It talks about specifics, Secret Ravine Creek. It talks about adding new parkland. This is over a decade ago, so I'm not sure how much of this is still relevant or is still something that the town would want. This is something that we as a committee should parse up and take a look at and decide when we're doing our policy writing, we need to keep this, delete this, or modify it. We also have some things that we've already done. I believe the Blue Goose facility has already been done. We have some other things that are in here. We'll go through as staff. If there's been a conservation easement agreement done, we'll report back on what the status is on those. Master plans for access. If anything on here was done, we'll go back and say, okay, since this wasn't an adopted plan, it may not have made it onto anybody's to-do list. Just putting that out there is why that wouldn't have been done. If they're still important to the town, then obviously we need to add that to somebody's to-do list. Something we would put in the current plan. And there's a lot of financing in here, and you can see the difference between the parkland acquisition mitigation fee and the Quimby Act dedication fee, blah, blah, blah. These are all legalese phrases that all result around development impact fees. Now, let me tell you a little story about development impact fees. You don't want them. You're always chasing your tail if you're collecting money. What you want are the improvements and the land, because regardless of how much money you collect, the cost of that will always be more than you collect. And over an adult beverage, I'll be happy to explain why that happens. But the policy of the town should be to want the improvement, the trail, the park, or something like that, rather than collecting fees. If the developer can write a check and walk out the door, I pretty much guarantee you, you're only going to get about 60% of what you actually need to get whatever it is done. That is the dirty little secret of impact fees. Impact fees were not designed for large developers. They were designed for the one-off lot in the middle of town that needed to address these things. And it's just, you can't put a park on one lot of town in most towns. There are lots in your town where you could easily put a park. But those are the sorts of things that we look at when we're trying to implement. But I want you to be thinking, how do we incrementally add to our park and trail system without collecting money and hoping we have enough at the end of 10 years, right? Or 15 years, because you'll always not have enough money. And then you're looking for handouts, you're looking for a grant, or you're looking for some sort of, other means to make that happen. And it's an uncomfortable place to be. So one of the considerations to make parks and recreation a standalone element. Right now, it's tucked into land use. And I think by making it its own, you can kind of plant your flag. I think it's a great idea. I do want to talk to you about some other things like equestrian trails and things like that don't really appear prominently, and maybe they should. I honestly don't know. So those are the types of things that we should probably look at. I love the idea of connectivity, SACOG survey, regional trails that we're all aware of, some we may not be aware of, and certainly bikeways. This is essential quality of life stuff, right? This is the frosting that turns a muffin into a cupcake. This is why people want to stay. And for years, this stuff has been poo-poo. This is still not state policy. State would rather you build mini storage for people than they would have amenities for people. And I would contend that development without amenities is a travesty, and we need to not be in that boat. Talk about a soapbox there, Chairman, I apologize. I really would like the committee to discuss whether this is a realistic set of numbers, because not only is this a really high bar to match, it's also really expensive to maintain. The building of a park it's not inexpensive by any stretch of the imagination. You'd be actually surprised at how expensive it is to build a park. But at the end of the day, it's the maintenance. And that pretty much is true for any public amenity. It's the maintenance that weighs on the community. It's the maintenance that takes away from your budget to do everything. So a finite amount of revenue, how do you make it stretch? There are some tips and tricks that crafty cities and towns have done for years. Dual usage, you make the amenity also something for water quality, or you adopt a Melrose. But remember, this is all moving forward. This isn't going to do anything for the existing deficit that you have. And so you have this situation where we have these policies that are recommended in the 2010 plan. Are they still relevant? Are they still something you would want? And it's something we need to talk about as a group. And I just added a little bit. Remember, we talked about very early on, and I can share the spreadsheet again if you didn't see it on the website, but we're looking at about 1,000 people based on the growth rate that I would anticipate, ignoring RENA and all the other things that are out there. But this is based on your growth rate percentages for the community. So, that's 5 acres of active and 5 acres of passive park. That's a lot to maintain.
When you say 1,000 residents, what time period are you talking about there?
I think I did that over 20 years, Andy. Do you remember? I don't remember. One moment, please. I have that answer. That's not it. That's not it.
Some on the housing committee also.
It was over the 20-year period.
I think your growth projections are not realistic at all, to be honest. I think we're going to see all that growth happen in the next 5 years, if not sooner.
I'd actually be shocked if that happened, because here's what you've done for the last 20 years. The last 20 years, you've garnered an average growth rate of 0.48% as reported to the Department of Finance. These are the actual numbers reported, right?
The thing that's changed is the land behind Rayleigh's has all been rezoned last year or 2 years ago. It was rezoned for residential and high density and medium density residential. So I think we need to assume that's going to be, I mean, we can use whatever numbers we want for the 20-year growth, but I think that land behind Rayleigh's is going to be developed here pretty soon.
Sure.
And that's going to be 1,000 people right there.
It could be. I mean, we can adjust the rates however you like. If we use SACOG's rate, you're looking at 2,000 people. In the overall scheme of things, for the town, that's a big deal. For most, it's not. But you're right. The ratio is not based on a number. It's based on, not based on the growth rate. It's based on the number per thousand. And one of the things that we need to talk about as a committee, what about private open space? Those sorts of things. The actual population growth for the last 20 years has been relatively solid and static. And you may have a blip along the way where one or more projects changes this. But by and large, there isn't a whole lot of vacant land in town that you could develop for impressive housing. And that's part of what the land use committee will be talking about. But anyhow, this is a sidebar. We could guess on the numbers all day long,
Sure.
But you're absolutely right. There's a possibility for more. I simply use this as an example.
And then one other quick question: that 5 acres of active parkland, I assume that they're including Del Oro and Sierra College and all the schools.
This is new parkland.
So, I think that there might be a little confusion because this master plan was not adopted. And let's go back, if you don't mind, Mark, go back where it talked about, it had a bunch of, keep going back. Go the other direction. Sorry. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Okay. No, it's one more after this, I believe.
That's trails.
So it was when it was talking about the 5 acres per thousand, the proposal. There it is. There it is. So what it's saying here, as of 2010, and then you take a snapshot of the population, and then in addition, anything more than that over per thousand residents, or is it in total population?
This is new growth. You can only apply these policies to new growth.
Yeah. So, okay. And then, but it was not adopted. I just want to make sure everybody understands that this was not adopted yet.
That's correct. And I would contend that you're nowhere near this ratio right now.
And then
I don't know yet.
I think Bonnie had her hand up.
Yeah, actually, my question was, I think it was one of your first slides. Did I understand correctly that instead of being 5 acres per thousand residents, we're only at 1 acre per thousand residents?
No, that may be close. If you just take the stuff the town owns.
So what is the ratio of owned 1 acre per thousand?
That's roughly what you have right now.
Okay.
And that's assuming 3 acres for Blue Acre.
Right, which, right. I think more than 2/3 was parking lot. So
I agree.
Yeah.
While it's important, it's not open space.
Because the 2010 master plan lists 83 acres, 83.7 acres.
Most of which is not owned by the town.
Right,
and most
right.
of it's not even in the town.
So I think we need to be careful about when we're talking about these numbers. Does it include all that extra stuff or not?
That's a committee decision. That's correct. Yeah, I'm not. If I were, given my druthers, I would only include what the town actually controls. But that's me. I might include regional parks only because those might be owned by a public agency that we might have a relationship with. But if the town doesn't own it, then you aren't in control of it.
I think we should at least have a joint use agreement in place before we can count something.
Yeah, and it should be a long-term joint use agreement.
Yeah. I mean, you can't count, like you mentioned earlier, you can count a school, but the school district could say, okay, we're going to put a fence around this school and lock it up. It's closed.
Yep. And that actually happens in areas, and that's one of the reasons it's a cautionary tale.
I think you'll find we do have use agreements with the schools.
The only one I'm aware of is the little tot lot at Loomis Grammar. something at Delaro Track, and the tennis court at Delaro Track, and the pool at Delaro Track.
Mhm. So we can look at a little bit of that, and you'll find that most of those use agreements limit when and who can use the site.
So, question for the committee then, you know, what do we feel? I mean, I personally think that the parks should be parks inside of our town that we're in control of. What I'd really like to hear from other members too, what they think.
I'm okay including the schools if there's you know, some joint use agreements in place, you know, and they should be, you know, we've got to have some sort of documentation that we go to and say, this per agreement, we've got this acreage for this many years, and then the town needs to be kind of proactive about extending those and expanding those, and you know, I think one of the issues is just money. Is it cheaper for the town to build a park and maintain a park, or is it? My guess is it's a lot cheaper to, you know, pay this, you know, have an agreement with the school district and help them maintain them and help, you know, kind of split the cost with the school district if we got shared facilities that are used by the school during the day and residents in the afternoon and evening. I don't think it's realistic for the town to expect the town to build and maintain large acres of parks at this point. It doesn't, I don't know that we have the funding. We don't have any use community, you know, I can't remember what the term is, but like Granite Bay's got a community fee that you per parcel tax or whatever that goes into a parks budget, and they've got money. The town doesn't have anything like that.
I see Eden Lee's hands up.
Yeah, I just had a quick question on the joint use agreement with the school districts. Is there an expiration date on that agreement, or is that in perpetuity?
They expire. I think they're 20 years typically.
So do we have access to, can we find out exactly what those joint use agreements are? Mary Beth, is there a way that?
Sean knows what those agreements are, Jan. I've heard him talk at the council about that, and I know the town actually put money to fund some of those school improvements. So I think what we can do is get Mark and Sean together to figure out exactly the agreements that the town has.
Okay, I think that'd be really helpful. And then Rebecca has her hand up.
Just a minute. Okay, I'd like to ask a question. So, you know, when I look at, are we talking about things just in the town boundaries, or are we considering Loomis Basin as a whole? And the reason I ask that is that if we're going to be incorporating the elementary schools, which, for example, I live very close to Placer Elementary, they have a beautiful soccer field, and, you know, it could well become or be groomed to become more than it is, but it's not within the boundaries of the town. And so it would help me to understand what would be realistic for this committee regarding geographical boundaries.
Anders, do you want to take that?
Well, one thing is, you know, the general plan does just cover the town limits, but what, you know, Mark gives some thought to this is some recognition of adjacent facilities, contribution, shared agreements to actually make sure there is enough park space for the residents of the town of Loomis. And, you know, you have a Loomis Basin Park, which is pretty close. You have other facilities that we should probably look at is, you know, something the town may want to contribute because residents are using those things. But typically in the general plan, you just focus on those things that you can provide within the town limits.
I can't see if anybody else has their hand up.
I have Jenny Neisley, who's an attendee in this meeting, with her hand up, if you'd like to.
Absolutely.
Comment.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jenny.
Okay. I don't know if you were done with the presentation. I just wanted to make a comment that The the use, I would be in favor of using the schools use agreements if they're in place and renewed. As a kid that grew up just from Loomis School, we would go up there all the time and use the school to swing on the swings or whatever there was. So I would be in favor of that. And also in our workshop, Jan, you remember that it was brought up that, we're collecting these fees, but we're not actually using them for anything. And so I think that we need to come up with a plan that's clear. And if we're collecting, I'd rather get the land, like Mark says. So I just want to put that out there. Thank you.
I can tell you that the use agreement we have with Del Oro expires in 2027. I've got a copy of it. So it's right around the corner.
Thanks, Matt. I see Bonnie's hands up.
Yeah, Bonnie, go ahead.
Yes, to Rebecca's point about trying to be very clear about the geography. I think that if we're talking about the Loomis general plan, we really only have control about that land that's in our incorporated boundaries.
And I think, Russ, did you have something to say?
I do. The only two parks that we got are Stonegate and Heritage Park is also a subdivision, but it has some park elements in it. And the town owns Heritage Park. The town owns Stonegate. Stonegate was put in way back when I first became a parks commissioner, and I've been out of that business now for almost 20 years, and I spent 20 years in that business. What we found as a parks commission was it's much better, as has been previously said, to have the developer put the park in according to our specification so that it's complete and finished when it's done. And we don't have to worry about anything except the maintenance. And then on the other hand, maintenance is a serious cost. The King Road Park, for example, there was some discussion at one point to where Loomis might be able to take that over and get it from the county, much like we got the library. It's about $85,000 a year to pay the maintenance on that park. And I don't know where the town's going to get that kind of money to do that. So basically, we only have two parks that we can talk about. We got some open space, and that also needs maintenance money. So to think that we have 17 square miles, which I'm not quite sure how many acres there is to a mile, but that's the total capacity of Loomis property. And to do 5 acres of each type of park per every 1,000 people, you better own the property now, or it's not going to happen. So we've got a long ways to go.
So can you clarify Stonegate and Heritage Park for us, Russ? Because just want everybody to understand that like Heritage Park is a town-owned property that had a development approved, but then it went belly up, and I think the town just purchased the land, correct?
What happened is we purchased the whole subdivision, and the intentions on that were to, sometimes they're not remembered by some of the other folks, as I heard earlier committee. That particular property was, I believe, a 42 lot subdivision, which had a lot of open space. It had a pond. It had a lot of things there that were nice. Okay. That subdivision could very well have supplied the space needed for homes, for people that to meet our housing element. Unfortunately, we never chose to meet our housing element, so we didn't do anything with that. And I believe the Corps of Engineers permit has expired on that also. The Heritage Park was originally put in by Placer County And there was some significant reluctance on the town of Loomis to even want a bathroom in that park, to want anything in that park, because they didn't want the people living adjacent, didn't want anybody coming from outside the area to practice or play ball or soccer or anything like that. So from that point, we've been using everybody else's park, and we've been using the schools significantly. The county has also invested, Placer County Parks invests money in the schools and has use permits for the schools. They've got agreements with the schools for the money that we put into those schools. You can look at Franklin and see the field at Franklin, which is a synthetic field, baseball and soccer and whatever else gets played there. The same thing happens with the same schools that we work with from the Loomis standpoint. Placer, every school in our district, even though most of them or some of them are out of town. So if there's anything else you'd like, I think we should have a discussion with Placer County and get some of the background on that. Dave Tooker is the representative for Jim Holmes, and he represents this area for parks.
And then you mentioned Stonegate Park.
Yeah, that's over in off Arcadia.
Okay,
yeah. Stonegate was a development at the time, and
Got
that
it.
park was put in.
All right. And I think there was somebody on our chat that wanted to speak. Mary Beth?
Yeah, I've got a hand raised by Jean and Miguel, and then from the beginning, I've got comments in the chat from Mike Shalito. Sorry,
okay.
Mike Shalito. And, I chatted back with him. He asked if I could read those.
Okay.
And then I also have an opportunity to bring him into comment from there, if you're okay with that.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay, so Mike started early by, this was at 6:30. Quimby Act provides for land dedication of 5 acres per 1,000 population or payment of in lieu fee or a combination. Many cities or towns require land dedication per park dedication standards and payment of park impact fees per dwelling unit for park development. He says, I don't agree with Mark's blanket statement related to inadequacy of park impact fees to fund development. He says, shouldn't include land not owned by the town in your calculations. Agree to comment that joint use agreement should be required to count acreage that guarantees access via lease, easements, etc.
Okay.
There's another one down here. Ongoing maintenance of new parks can be funded via a CFD, Community Facilities District, for service that is required to be in place prior to new development commencing. And Mike, if you'd like to speak, go right ahead.
I apologize. I feel like I was sniping from the weeds and comments, so I'm not trying to do that. I do agree with a couple of comments. One, whenever you can get the land, for sure. But I also think you can do, I think the 5 acres of active land per 1,000 broken down between neighborhood and community parks is a reasonable standard. It's the Quimby standard of per 1,000. If you want to have open space in addition to that, I also agree with the comment, you want to be prepared to take care of it. I wouldn't put, I think it's great that there's been such a long ongoing use of school facilities in the Loomis Basin area in the town of Loomis. I think that exists in almost every city that happens. That augments what you do. But I don't think it would be appropriate to count that land as acreage in your park standard. I mean, nobody does that unless it is a lease agreement or there's some sort of possessory interest via an easement or something that guarantees use, because you aren't guaranteed that use. And so in addition to new development, which may, will likely occur in Loomis, the fact is the Loomis town has a bit of a shortfall already, that, sometime you may be able to make up that via development agreement or some other sort of thing that happens that's unrelated to residential development. But I applaud the issue, and I'm not, I have a good deal of experience both with park land dedication requirements as well as the various ways to fund development, including park impact fees, development agreements, as well as turnkey parks where the developer builds it. So all of those things should be explored, but I wouldn't eliminate any possibility. I think it's important for the town to be creative, but I do agree to, to really get the land, because I think that's something that Loomis is lacking in.
Thank you very much, Mike. And I think Miguel or Jean was next.
Yeah, Jean is next. Go ahead, Jean, unmute.
Okay, is that on now?
Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to make the point that the school district did not make these agreements with us out of the goodness of their hearts. It's because we paid for playgrounds. When they were redoing playgrounds, the town obviously does not want to have more maintenance than they can afford. So what they did was use some of the collected park fees that we have had people paying into for years, and they paid the school district, and when they were redoing the schools playgrounds, I think not only at Loomis, but check into whether H. Clark Powers, which is within the city, the town, also may have gotten money from the town. So I'm sure there was an agreement on that, because partly it was our money that went into doing it. And issues have been raised from time to time. One is that you don't have access when schools are in use. And an older person, I remember at one meeting, said, well, there's nothing there for me to use, it's all for kids. So there probably are needs for other kinds of facilities as well. But as far as the background on this, on the schools, and why we would have an agreement with them, is partly because we had skin in the game for that one. And I don't remember if the comment was about Franklin School, if someone mentioned Franklin, but a few years ago, there was substantial improvement there in a lot of the athletic areas. And that was put in with the county doing that. So that's how that came about there. It was county money that went into that. The other point I wanted to make, and it goes way back to the beginning and our growth rate, I don't ever hear anything mentioned about what the effect of the recession was. We had on the books subdivisions that never got built, and the Heritage Park one down by the freeway is one that was not because of the recession. That was other reasons, but that was a 42 unit development, and I don't know about the Army Corps permit expiring, but as far as I know, the subdivision is still viable if somebody wanted to pick it up. I'm not sure about the details on that, but we had one, we had our first clustered development over on Saunders, and that was about 7 units or so. Most of our subdivisions are small. Across the road was the Najadian subdivision, and that was maybe 8 or 9 units. We have some other ones down on Wells is a more rural one that has probably half a dozen larger parcels. That one didn't go out because of the recession. That's still open. We had one on Brace Road that had I would say it's a while back, maybe 8 to 10. And they came back and wanted us to take that out and put it into larger parcels, which we did at their request. But some of the lack of development is because the recession came along, and some of those, like the 7, 8, 9 unit ones, never got built just because there was too much cost to keep it going when there was no money for building and when all the prices fell apart. So there's no real way I know to factor that in. It's not going to show up in SACOG data, but I think it was, as far as, since we have so few houses being built anyway, if you have 10, 15, 25 units that fell apart because of the recession, that adds up for us. And yes, it is a slow growth rate. During those years, I think someone said that we doubled our growth rate between those 2 years, from 2 to 4 houses being built.
Thank you, Jean. I think Miguel's next.
Miguel, proceed. You would just have to unmute.
Now, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Glad to see Mr. Shalato here. Let me talk about the Quimby Act. The community can't just say, we want X number of acres and charge developers for that. The Quimby Act is enabling legislation that allows you to obtain parkland fees and park development fees. Now, Michael said 5 acres, and the reason why Roseville had more than 5 acres of parkland before they adopted the fee, so they could have 5 acres. Loomis, all we have really is 8 acres of parkland, and the Quimby Act says the land must be owned by the jurisdiction. So, and it's, you can look at the Quimby Act. So according to the Quimby Act, we can only require 3 acres of parkland per 1,000 residents. And the land must be owned by the town, and money can only be spent on neighborhood or community parks that are owned by the town. So I want to clarify that. So the current requirement of 5 acres per 1,000 was developed by using land that wasn't owned by the town of Loomis. I was on the council when that occurred. I brought up the point many, many times to the town attorney. We've gone around and around and around about the legality of what Loomis is doing. And as far as I'm concerned, that's still in question. But my feeling is, well, it's not my feeling. Read the Quimby Act law. It says that you can have 3 acres per 1,000 unless the jurisdiction owns more than that, up to 5 acres, which Loomis doesn't own. There's been a lot of statements made about being able to afford maintenance of the park. The Sunrise Loomis Park costs about $25,000 to $28,000 a year to maintain. The surplus in the town budget almost every year has been at least $200,000. So the town would have money. Mr. Shalato pointed out, you can have a community service district, you can have a lighting and landscape district. The park that's going in on Taylor Road, there's a small park going in on that. That one's going to be maintained by the homeowners. So I don't think maintenance would be a major concern. The other thing about SACOG, they based the town's population on our prior growth rate, and it was low, very, very low. But if you look at the Grove, has been, or the one behind Rayleigh's, whatever it's called, that's going to be developed, and that's going to be 1,000 people just in that one development. And there'll be more development. So the SACOG numbers are totally incorrect as far as the number of people that will be in Loomis. So I wanted to correct that. As far as the consultant saying that you can't get enough money to pay for the acquisition of land and development of the park, the formula that the town uses for park dedication fees has been updated on a I don't know about an annual basis, but has been updated to reflect the current cost of construction and the current cost of land. So it can be, it does work. I agree with what's been said. It's better if you can acquire the land, which you can in the Subdivision Map Act, that the developer has to provide the number of acres that they're required to provide. But again, I want to get back to the Quimby Act. I wish that the consultant would give each one of you a copy of the Quimby Act so you can see exactly what it says and what it allows. And it only allows expenditure of funds collected on property that is owned by the town. Thank you.
Thank you, Miguel. Mark, did you want to respond?
Yes.
Mark, hold on just 1 second real quick. I wanted to jump in and let everybody know I put a link to the Quimby Act in the chat.
Thank you. And thank you.
That's all.
I was actually gonna walk them through that. But yeah, there are some pretty severe limitations on the Quimby Act. Go ahead and avail yourself of them. A lot of agencies are moving away from the Quimby Act because it really only pertains to subdivisions. So, it's a fine basis, but it isn't the end of the world. And don't get me wrong, you can keep your fees up to date, but I don't know of a single agency that's been able to collect fees over a long period of time and then pay for something without having to dip into their own pocket. But that's neither here nor there. It doesn't really affect our discussion. We need to talk about what we want to do as a community. And I do know that you could do CFDs. That's a community facilities district. You can also do CSDs. That's a community services district. You can do a lot of interesting financing things. They all require one thing, require a vote of the property owner to tax themselves. And the reason that those are typically done on new development is you usually only have one property owner at that time, and that would be the developer. And then anybody that buys into that particular project must in fact sign on that they agree to it, or they don't get to buy the property. Going back out to the rest of the town to adopt something like that is taxing yourself. And certainly that is possible. It's one of the funding mechanisms that the town could consider if they want to raise money for their facilities. And there are a lot of privately maintained parks. It does get into the fairness issue, though. If you have a homeowners association maintaining a park that the rest of the community can use free of charge, that seems a little onerous, but it's something that we can certainly talk about. And maybe it gets factored into something the committee should think about is, do you provide for, can they meet some of their open space and park requirements by building a private park that they maintain? Some communities do, some don't. It's really up to the town how they wish to approach that. And I understand that there's a project in town that could develop a large number of units for the town, and it could result in 1,000 people. Absolutely acknowledge that. The way you set the policies up is it doesn't matter. You should be able to have it based on a ratio. So if things occur, then other things happen regardless of what the growth rate is. You don't want to tie it to a specific time or growth rate, but that's fair enough. Quimby Act is good reading. You can find several summaries. I don't know what the attorney posted. I just go to the legislative thing, but I'm used to reading the law there. But there are lots of publications, including some put out by OPR, that talk about parkland. And the speaker, I think it was Miguel, is correct that you have to establish some parameters before you can just go out and start charging for certain things. And that is usually, it starts at a floor. I think it's 3 acres per 1,000, and you can go up from there based on what you already own. And initially, I thought the Quimby Act was only for property that was owned by the agency, but there have been some changes of late, and I would have to read the legislation before I informed you on anything there. But go ahead and avail yourself of it. It's been around for a long time. It's used by a lot of agencies, and it's actually a good thing as far as I'm concerned. I'll go on. Can I go on with the rest of my presentation, or you want me to stop?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So one of the things that we need to talk about are park types. And I put it in quotes because not all things are parks, but that just gets thrown around as a pretty handy euphemism for someplace where you can play. We have open space, we have active parks, we have trails that may or may not be used for certain things. And this was just a quick and dirty, here's where things are, and here's where they go. And we need to figure out some of this type of matrix here to figure out what we want to do with the space and how we want to interact within our community. So in a conservation area, they probably aren't open to the public. It may qualify as open space, but if somebody preserves a wetland, do we give them credit for that? Even though it's already required for them to do certain things, it's something we just need to talk about. There's no, like I said, there's no magic formula there. When you say park to me, it's someplace I can walk my dog, let my kids play soccer, or throw a Frisbee. And for you youngins, that's a plastic disc that we threw around back in the day. Now they play pickleball or something. But neighborhood parks are typically smaller, but we have things that aren't even on here, like tot lots, like wide spots on a trail, like exercise pieces. There's a whole host of different ways that communities have added open space into their diet without having to have a 5, 10, 20 acre park. So it's entirely up to us. And this is what I wanted to get to. Eden sent some great photos. Some people sent some great photos. We have here examples of small parks where we're using, frankly, a leftover piece of land. This would have been part of a reclamation plan for a quarry. And it's turned into something marvelous as far as I'm concerned. It's beautiful. These are passive spaces, meaning in what we say in the vernacular is passive means you go and you entertain yourself, right? You walk your dog, you have a picnic, you do whatever. Active parks are designed for sports, typically baseball, soccer, tennis, those types of things. So this one happens to be in Minnesota, but seems appropriate in our area because of our quarry. And then this one I think is amazing. It's in Shanghai, but it's an example of a small piece of land that may have been left over and that was used for something interesting. And you can see that it's got passive, you can walk around and see things, and it also has some pretty amazing trails as far as I'm concerned. But anyhow, there are potentials for parks like this in remnant areas of our community that we could be able to program, if you will. So we need you to look at the goals and policy of the element. I have a slide that I'll get to in a minute, and then another complete slide deck that I think is being sent to you individually that talks about, do these still work for the town? Has anything changed? What would you like to do? Do you need to add any policies? I think the idea of drilling down on what we have in terms of a joint use agreement makes sense. Do we differentiate between neighborhood parks and community parks? If it's a community park, can we take credit for a regional park? Do we need to have something in place to do that? Those types of things are essential. And do we use the same park standard through town? Do we emphasize trails on the periphery and parks on the interior? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But it occurs to me that you have fewer people per acre out in the periphery because the lots are a lot larger than they are downtown. So, but it may be more expensive to buy land downtown because it is more developable. I don't know. It's something we need to think about as a town and come to some sort of recommendations on. And then, of course, I've talked about it a couple times. Do you want to give credit for private open space? Some communities are absolutely not. It's required. You deal with it and be gone. I don't know what the right answer is on that. I can tell you that some also give credit for it. They don't give one-to-one credit. But they do give partial credit for open space that is embedded in a development and paid for by the owners at that time. Something else we should talk about. I really like the idea of emphasizing trails to connect your community and maybe using odd spots along the way to have a little tot lot, have it follow a drainage, do something that is both useful and innovative for your community. But again, that's just me looking at it from here. Maybe you have a more formal park system that you have in mind. But those are all options you have available to you, which is kind of interesting to talk to. When it comes to writing goals and policies, there's a process that we follow. Typically, usually the goal is an aspirational piece. Maybe it's the goal of the town to have a specific ratio over time, or to have a certain connectivity, those types of things. An objective is usually something in between, where you can say, okay, for the next period of time, or by the time of this plan, we'd like to at least get this far down the path toward that goal. A policy is something that we would do that indicates a specific action that the town would be committed to do. The town will do this. The town shall do this. The town, will encourage this. Actions are individual directives, frankly, that we don't put a lot of them in the general plan per se, although they accompany it and they're in lockstep. That's the pointy end of the stick. Update the parkland fee ordinance. Okay, so that almost becomes a to-do list on how you implement the policies and to get to the objective and meet the goal of your plan. But once it's done, you check it off. You don't want to have to do a general plan amendment to eliminate that from your general plan. You don't want the plan to get stale in the next 2 to 3 years. It's also normal to put in some sort of idea in the implementation piece of when things might have to happen. I shy away from putting in dates because I think it was Jesse that pointed out, oh, was it Jesse? It was Gene that pointed out the Great Recession that we all survived. You put a date in and immediately something silly happens and you can't meet the date. But we need to have a prioritization of what should happen first, because there are limited resources available to do those things. So one of the things we should talk about as a committee is, once we get the goals and policies and we get everything done, what do you want to do first? Because you can't do it all at once. And then we kind of go through and talk about what makes the most sense to happen first. It's a lot of interesting things that go on, and some things have to happen before other things happen. So this is what we follow. I have a lengthier PowerPoint presentation. It's like 6 or 8 slides. It's not the end of the world, that you have access to, that kind of walks you through. And I think it even provides some examples of how that's done. Don't sweat this. If you can come up with the ideas, we can help you put it into goals, policies, and objectives. So that's not something I need you to worry about, but I wanted you to see what we would do with your ideas and with your thought process, so that it shows up in the general plan appropriately. And then I have my normal before the next meeting, review the policies that were recommended in the 2010 plan, including the ones you already have, see if any of them make sense. The way we typically do that in our world is we just go through with a highlighter. Yep, I still like that. And we usually have a few different ways of looking at it. Yep, it's good the way it is. Nope, this is terrible. I never want to see this again. It's okay, but it needs this tweak. And we'll figure out how to make it work. Those are the 3 categories we typically use. We have a formal table that we do sometimes for this. But when you're going through it, just have a couple of highlighters. It's like, yep, I like this. Nope, I don't like this. Or I'd change it and I'd change these words. Those are the types of things that will be the most useful. And then take a look at the policy writing link that you'll see, and see how that goes in there. And it's not etched in stone by any stretch of the imagination. They're just guidelines that we use to teach our staff how to write policies. And again, we'll help you with all that. And then, of course, there's the survey, and obviously the continuation of things you like and don't like. And that ends my presentation.
Thank you, Mark. You mentioned a survey.
SACOG survey is what I was working.
Oh, okay. So the one with the trails.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. No worries. Thank you very much. Does anybody in the committee have any questions? Or anybody in the public?
I have some comments in chat that I'd like to provide forward, and then Jean Wilson has her hand raised.
Okay.
Mike Shelito said Miguel and Mark are correct relative to the Quimby Act. And this one doesn't say who it's from, but I think it's Andreas. When looking at the Quimby Act, please pay particular attention to Government Code Section 66477A3B, which provides for the flexibility about where Quimby Act fees are spent. that Mark was referring to. Miguel said fees can only be spent on land owned by the town. And that's it there. So Jean, you may proceed.
Am I still on? Am I in?
You're here.
Okay. I had a question. Someone mentioned Stonegate. I don't know of a Stonegate Park, but there is the Stonegate subdivision that's back behind Taylor, a few streets in. Does that subdivision have a little park of its own? It's got an HOA. I don't know if it has a park though. Does anybody know? Maybe they don't.
I actually live in, this is Eden. I live in the Stonegate HOA, and and we have green spaces, but we don't actually technically have a park, but I guess it qualifies as an open space.
Okay, but you don't have a park. Okay, I wondered about that. The second, well, another item, and probably it belongs in another meeting, but hopefully this category is to talk about the library and possible community center. The current general plan mentions a number of times, particularly in reference to the land behind Rayleigh's, but in general, the need for a community center was expressed quite a few times in doing the old general plan. And I brought that up at the facilities meeting and they said, no, that has nothing to do with, they only want to know about current facilities, take that to Parks and Rec. So I'm taking that to Parks and Rec in case that it's your department. And if it's not, tell us where to kick it back to. The other thing about the library, we now own the library property, which we didn't at the previous general plan. It was the county library. It's now town library. And just recently we got the property itself. So I'm thinking about when I was on the committee and we were trying to get the county to at least let us lease the library building. One of the things I was doing was the legal research on state laws, and I came across in the library law section, not the codes, but in some library information. Most of it is about the sections of law to do with library in the education code. But there is one that was in some 1909 code, and since the state library list showed it, I assume it may be still good, that lists libraries as recreational facilities. And if that's the case, I'm wondering if we could now count that library small acreage as part of our parks system. It's not what we might think of as a park, but if the state is willing to count it as a recreational facility, maybe we can too. Maybe somebody could look into that.
Thank you, Jean. I just wanted to mention in our general plan for July 2001, number one policy under our purview is the town will pursue all available funding mechanisms to provide a multi-use community center. So it seems like it is here in Parks and Rec.
Madam Chair, Rebecca has her hand raised.
I wanted to second the motion for Jean Wilson. I am part of the community orchestra that's led by Greg McLaughlin. And it's really hard. I mean, COVID put everyone on hiatus, but it's really hard to find a center, basically for an orchestra to even play. So I think I am glad to know that a community event center is considered as part. Am I to understand that that's really part of Parks and Rec?
Sounds like it was given to us by facilities, but sure.
Okay, all right. That's great. Thanks. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you. That's all.
Matt Fox.
Yeah, I just wanted to also mention, going back to joint use agreements for a minute, that the county also has a Parks and Rec fund that covers our area. And I'm not sure how that fits into the town, but I know the county gave money to Del Oro for the aquatic center. So there must be a way for that money to be spent within the town limits, even though it's coming through the county. But it seems like that's kind of happening. It's totally separate from whatever the town's doing with Parks and Rec. So the school district goes directly to the county, requests the money, the county approves it and gives it to the school district, even though maybe that's not, shouldn't that be coordinated with the town somehow? You know, if we had a bucket of, you know, list of priorities that the town wants to spend money on, it seems like that should come into play versus just the county just giving it out to whoever kind of requests it.
I'll have to look into that. It wouldn't surprise me if the county had their own rec fee to handle development in the unincorporated area.
They do.
And that's what they're spending. Is that true, Miguel? Okay. Then it may be the county. The other thing is the school district isn't in the city, in the town limits. The school district resides on a piece of land owned by the state. And so we have very limited access to that. I'm being a little glib, but it is kind of like a foreign country. And so the county and the district can do pretty much whatever they want without asking the town for much.
Okay. Okay. That's helpful. Thanks.
Bonnie has her hand up.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, and I think Mark mentioned this early on in the beginning of his presentation that, you know, we have a lot of different stakeholders that are listed in the policy, such as the school districts, Placer Land Trust. Have we engaged with these stakeholders? I think it is important that we kind of loop them into the discussion, and that would also include the library, because I know that they also have some, you know, strategic planning that they are trying to work on as well.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I have one comment from Russ Kelly in the chat. I think Quimby has a 5-year use time frame, or you give the money back. And I think we kind of talked about that, but I just wanted to make sure that was addressed. And then Miguel had his hand raised.
Okay, Miguel, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Since I've been around here for a long time, about 40 years ago, school districts were able to levy a 5-cent tax included in the property tax, and it was called the school community use tax, and that was to pay schools for the extra costs that they would incur when community groups used their facilities. Well, about 10 or 20 years ago, that tax was all blended into the one school tax. But the point here is, it's not us asking the school district if we can use their facilities. By law, they have to let the community use their facilities because they're receiving funds so that the community can use their facilities. So I just, quote, wanted to bring that up. The other thing I think is kind of interesting with McLaughlin Studios. When the Del Oro Theater was proposed and everybody got behind backing it, one of the things that they said was it was going to be used by the community. But as some of the groups that have wanted to use it have found out that the costs are so prohibitive that nobody can use it. The dance company Green, I forget their name right now, but they used to put on some performances there. But I think they charge them $500 a day for.
I agree with you, Miguel. It's exorbitant.
Well,
it defeats the purpose.
But according to state law, and as I mentioned, the community tax that they receive, they should be allowing the community use that. That's neither here nor there. One other thing I think is very important, because you're talking about open space. I think you should designate the corner of Interstate 80 and Horseshoe Bar, which has that big oak grove right on the corner. I think you should designate that a nature preserve, because when a developer comes in, I don't want to see that the same thing happened at Rockland Road and Sierra College, where all the oak trees are cut out. So I think the designation, at least in that one spot, of a nature preserve or nature open space would be beneficial to the community and would be something that everybody would really want to see. Thanks.
Thank you, Miguel. Anybody else on public comment?
I have a public comment from Jenny Neisley in the chat. I would agree to look at the new Loomis Community Library and Community Center land to be included as some of our park requirements and finding a way for a community center, including our senior center.
So question though, the library is in a different committee, correct? It's in the facilities committee. Is that right?
Services, yeah.
So I'm not sure how we would be able to include that with the parks.
If you want to do that as a committee, we'll make sure the goals, policies, objectives are put in the right place. But as you know, this general plan, parks has trails. Trails are part of circulation. Parks have community centers. They're part of facilities. So let us know what you're thinking, and we as a team will figure out where to put it that works best.
Okay. One of the things that I wanted to kind of bring up that Mark suggested was, should we have our own actual element in the general plan for Parks and Rec, which seems pretty important to me personally. I think that would be a really good idea. And in terms of homework and things to look at, let's look at the general plan in its existence now and look at the 2010 plan. And maybe next time what we can do is we can go through, what our thoughts are on each of our homework items to kind of get a little bit more zeroed in on some of these things. One thing I think might be really, really helpful is, Mary Beth, is there any way that you can take what's in the chat and put it in our minutes and also put all those links in the minutes so that we'll be able to easily get those when we're doing our homework? Is that something that, I don't want to add too much more to your workload, but I feel like it's really important to have those links.
Yes, definitely. And I do save the chats for the meetings. If there's sometimes there's not a whole lot of comments, but in this particular case with all the comments here, Carol will be given that to cut and paste into the minutes.
Okay. Yeah. And then the Quimby Act would be something for all of us to study really well. And do the trails survey that SACOG's requesting. That's also tell all your friends about it. And I think that's all I have. Oh, looks like Jesse has his hand up.
Oh, go ahead, Jesse.
I just want to point out there was an article in the Citrus Heights Sentinel. What they're doing is tying all of their schools and their parks together in a trail system. And it's something I had never heard of. Part of SB1 was a active transportation paths. They're getting over $6 million for 3 miles of trail. Definitely something to consider and look at as we think of how we want our parks and schools tied together. Citrus Heights is one step ahead of us.
That's excellent. Would you mind putting that in the chat, the article name? And
I'm 62, how?
I'll do it for you. Tell us, what is it again? What was the name of the newsletter?
Citrus Heights Sentinel from April 15th.
Okay.
It's called Construction to Begin This Year on New 2.9 Mile Trail in Citrus Heights.
Excellent.
Got hard copy.
And the date again was?
April 15th.
Probably.
Okay. All right. Looks like Matt Fox has his hand up.
Sorry, one last quick thing. Does anybody know why the 2010 plan was never adopted? Was there a sticking point, or was it just kind of got forgotten about, or?
I do.
Tell us, Miguel.
Yeah.
We went through all that work. The consultant and the committee adopted what I thought was a good plan, and whoever made up the agendas would never put it on the agenda. So I assume that the other council people did not want to pursue that because it does call out the 3 acres per 1,000, and it also specifies the 3 zones where the money had to be spent. So it was never done. And you'd have to ask the other 4 council people why they never voted for it. I tried to bring it up, but it never came forward.
Yeah, and actually, I think it was 5 acres per 1,000 and also 5 acres per 1,000 open space. So it's two.
Well, it's 5 acres by their plan, which, as far as I'm concerned, isn't a legal plan.
Okay. Anybody else? Bonnie.
Just, do you have the name of that article?
Go ahead, Bonnie.
Okay, sorry, I thought Mary Beth was asking something.
Oh, there it is. Okay, yeah. So I wasn't able to find it. Andreas found it. It's posted in the chat. The
Thank
link
you.
to that article. Thank you. Go ahead, Bonnie.
So with regards to the stakeholders, is that something that staff will be able to do? Maybe invite the school district superintendents or the library director so that we can, you know, get their input while we're trying to shape the policies?
Yes. Mary Beth, you'll be able to do that?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
And we should probably give them a heads up on what we want to talk about and give them some background, Mary Beth, so that they don't come here and deer in headlight
Yeah.
type of reaction. So they can come prepared to help as opposed to just be shocked.
Yes, yes. We'll work on that, Mark.
Happy to help with that too, Mary Beth, if you need it.
Okay.
All right, anybody else? Anybody from the public? We really covered a lot of ground this evening. Thank you so much. This has been really great discussion, good history, a lot of really great ideas, and it's obvious that our committee is definitely passionate about this subject. And thank you to Anders and Mary Beth and Andreas and Mark and Christy. Thank you all very, very much. We're going to see you again on May 27th at 6 o'clock. And looks like we are going to have a really strong agenda, and we'll have more folks here as well. So with that said, let's go ahead and adjourn our meeting. It's 7:34.
Thank you all.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.